Welcome to Astrology Night at Soul Food Coffee House here in Redmond, Washington. We are here to talk about the astrology for the month ahead for February of 2019. And before we jump in completely, there's a couple of announcements I would like to make. February 8th and 9th, I will be at the Tucson Astrologers Guild, and they've been meeting monthly for years and years and years and years. I've spoken to this group many times. If you're in the Tucson area, the location will be at the Arizona School of Acupuncture and Oriental Medicine. And if you Google Tucson Astrologers Guild, it will come up. And I will have a link for those of you on the internet on the page here but it'll be a Friday night event and then a Saturday afternoon event on chart interpretation. The Friday night event will be everything you ever wanted to know about Uranus, but didn't ask. Okay. Also, for those of you internationally, and this month the YouTube has reached just about 80,000 viewers this month. And so for those of you who are watching from other parts of the world, I will be speaking at the Balkan Astrology Conference in Belgrade on March 8th through 10th. The following weekend I will be in Istanbul at the Turkey Astrology Days conference in Istanbul on March 15th through the 17th. And then I will be at the Portuguese conference in Lisbon on March 22nd through 24th, and links will be on the screen for those of you who want to follow up. But we are here. Yay. And now. So, in review, last month we talked about how crazy January would be. That there was all kinds of stuff cooking, and there were a couple of eclipses, and I suggested that by the middle of the month things would be out of control, that they would start out of control, and certainly they did. And in my last month's forecast, I talked about how when Mars and Jupiter were going to be cohorting toward the middle end of the month, we would get what I called, I think I called a pause in the disaster, which is where we still kind of are. And lest we get our hopes up, things are about to change back to the abnormally normal. But there is a little bit of a breathing period of time here, and it's interesting that we are now done with eclipse season. We are coming into a month where there is virtually no outer planet activity. And when I say that, I mean there's no activity of aspects from an outer planet to another outer planet. In fact, there's not even any aspects from Jupiter to Saturn, or Jupiter and Saturn to Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto. In other words, all the activity is the Sun and the Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, and they are making aspects to each other, but they're making aspects to the outer planets. But it's when the outer planets make aspects to the outer planets that much of the heavier, weightier stuff goes down. And so February is intriguing because of its lack of outer planet activity. The inner planet activity, though, certainly is going to give us food for thought as the days and weeks unfold. So let's just hold that thought over there for a moment. The next thing that makes this month so powerful, though, is that Uranus, which we've already established is not making any aspects to any of the outer planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, or Pluto, but Uranus is in the last month of being in Aries for 84 years. So in 84 years, actually I guess it's technically 84 minus 7 years, someone who's got Excel running or is a mathematical, what's that, 77 years, something like that? 84 minus 7. What's 84 minus 7? I did it right, okay. All right, so Uranus will enter Aries again in 77 years. Now, here's the thing, is that when planets change signs, most often they have their most abrupt, noticeable activity when they first enter a new sign or just before they're leaving. Now that's obviously exclusive of intense aspects they might make when they're in the sign itself. But when a planet moves into a new sign, it's almost like we hear the new radio station, we hear the buzz, it's a new song, it's an, oh my God, did you see that, did you hear that? And it feels different. And that's true even going to the sun or the moon, which change signs every few days or every few weeks. But with the outer planets, the effects are more subtle and yet more powerful. And sometimes we have a hard time putting those two words together, subtle and powerful, because it sounds like they shouldn't be together. But anyone who knows anything about homeopathy knows that the subtler the physicality of a remedy, the more diluted it is, the more potent it can be. And there's a very basic lesson here that is important, and it's important. Okay, I just did something that I don't know whether I stopped my recording, but come on. We don't need this, do we? All right, nope, I think we're still recording. All right, so there's something very potent and powerful about the idea of subtlety having greater impact than the loud and noisy. And I think that we're going to see that to some extent this month, because we have a lot of the loud and noisy stuff, but the real action is that Uranus, which moved into Aries back in 2010, in fact, it moved into Aries, I believe the date was March 10th, 2010, and it was on that day that there was an earthquake and tidal wave and the Fukushima power plant melted down. And that was Uranus's movement into Aries' announcement. Hello, I'm here. And last May, Uranus left Aries and touched into Taurus, and then backed up, retrograded back into Aries, and is now direct again. And in March, Uranus makes its real move into Aries, and into Taurus, thank you, and it will then be in Taurus for the next 7 years. Now, I've talked a little bit in other places about Uranus in Taurus. I'll talk more about that next month, but let me just say this about the comparison of the two, and that is Uranus's job is the instantaneous resolution of opposites that can't be resolved. How can that be, he says. It's because Uranus is the paradoxical planet. It's the planet of instantaneous, unexpected activity. So how do you predict it? Well, you go, you don't know what's going to happen. How do you predict the unpredictable? It's like lightning. You can know that the storm is cooking and that there's buzz and electricity in the air. And you can say, there's going to be lightning any second. But you don't know where it's going to strike, and you don't know when it's going to strike. And that's the way Uranus works. It releases the opposites. It releases the tension that's stored up. Just like in the sky, you have the negative and positive ions that are trying to work it out, because cold, dry air has positive ionization, and negative ionization is contained in the warm, wet air. Negative ions feel good. It's why being by a babbling brook or by the ocean, seashore, or by a waterfall just feels recharging, because water against water makes negative ions, which kind of feel good. Positive ions are when the dry winds blow, whether they be the Fin, the Chinooks, the Sabras, the Santa Anas. An ill wind blows no good. Those are positive ions coming off of dry winds. So when you have this storm and the positive and negative ions bumping up against each other, psychology tells us that if you got differences in a relationship, talk about it, because communication is the solution. And I say, not always. Usually, I mean, it's a good rule to work by, but there are things that you just don't talk about, because the more you talk about it, the worse it gets. There are just things. I mean, it's going to dinner with the family, you know, with the extended family, and it's like warning the kids, don't talk about politics, you know, or don't tell them that, you know, there are just things that stir up problems, and they make more trouble than they don't resolve. It doesn't resolve it. But Uranus is the lightning that strikes, that resolves those irresolvable tensions. And Uranus in Aries functioned pretty well, because Aries is a fire sign. It's like lightning in the sky. You get the tension and it's now. It just blows the charge off. In Taurus, we're going to have a little bit of a different scene, because Taurus doesn't like to move. You know, it's Newton's law of motion. An object at rest tends to stay at rest. That's Taurus. An object in motion tends to stay in motion. And so as Uranus, and again, we're a little ahead of the game, but this is all coming back to what's going on now. As we go into March and Uranus moves into Taurus, where it will stay for the next 7 years, the changes are going to be way more powerful than they were when they were in Aries, because in Aries they happened on a regular basis. If you keep releasing the energy, it doesn't store up. But if you're like a granite hunk of rock and you don't move so easily, and the tension builds, when it finally breaks, there's an eruption, there's an earthquake, there's a lifequake, there's a volcanic explosion. And so I think that when Uranus moves into Taurus, that will become a little bit more prevalent. We'll see some of these deeper changes taking longer, but when they do. All right. What does that mean for February? It means this. It's like going to school and all of a sudden realizing it's tomorrow's the last day of school. And it's like, oh shit, that means I need to get that biology paper in, because if I don't, I'm going to fail the course. And I told my math teacher that I would get those 6 homework assignments that I didn't do last September, and I got to get, you know, it's almost like being forced to cram for an exam, because Uranus is on that train and it's leaving town, with you or without you. And so, in a way, when Uranus retrograded back into Aries last fall, in a way, there was a sense that we were given a remedial course, a chance on making changes, and changes did happen. I mean, without replaying the fall, there were some major changes that happened that hopefully will lead to good stuff. But February largely is going to replay. You know, that concept that when you die, your whole life flashes in front of you? Well, in a way, as Uranus gets closer and closer to leaving Aries, everything from 2010 to 2019, and it's longer than 7 years, because Uranus tips into a sign, it retrogrades, then it went into Taurus and it retrograded back. So we're looking at this kind of an extended period of time. But this February is like our final exam. And it's not just about Uranus in Aries. What it's about is that Uranus, when it was in Aries, the defining piece of Uranus being in Aries was its ongoing 7 times repeating square to Pluto in Capricorn, which was exact between 2012 and 2015. But we felt its buzz as early as 2010, and we're still living in this buzz of Uranus, the planet of change, revolution, shock, awe, surprise, in dynamic conflict, square to Pluto, the planet of the rich own everything. Pluto is a plutocracy. Pluto rules, if you will, oligarchies. Pluto is about not only power, but it's about the power of transformation. And I'm talking about here not like the leaves falling off the trees every October or November, because that's change, that it reoccurs and reoccurs. I'm talking about the power of a glacier coming in and taking down a forest and a mountain. That's power. And the difference is, one happens very rapidly, the other is like a one-way street of metamorphosis. It's the caterpillar. Pluto is the caterpillar metamorphosizing into the butterfly. It's that transmutation. And so we have these two planets of change, one of immediate shock, immediate unconventional revolution, Uranus, forming a 90-degree square to Pluto. The planet of the urges that come from the bottom of the volcano, from the lower chakras, the bacchanalian, kind of expressions of wanting to have pleasure and to feel at home in the universe. Remember, Uranus and Pluto were lined up exactly in conjunction in 1965 and 66 and defined the 60s. They were also in aspect during the French Revolution in those years. There's big changes whenever we have Uranus and Pluto conjunct, square, or opposed. And so we're coming out of this period of this opportunity to make great change. And we're in the last month of it, because once Uranus moves into Taurus, we'll still be dealing with the after effects and the ramifications of what went down in 2012 to 2015, including the Arab Spring, Tahrir Square, the Occupy Wall Street, the Occupy fucking Madison, Wisconsin. I mean, come on. Madison, Wisconsin was the site of a major, because it's the capital of Wisconsin. And without going too political too early in this conversation tonight, boy, do I get shit from people online. I should do a YouTube. I save everything that I delete out of the comments, and one of these days, but you don't even want to know. But the Occupy Madison, Wisconsin was actually a very big deal, and it's a very big deal that as Uranus moved out of Aries and into Taurus and then back into Aries, we had this whole period of where the power structure in Wisconsin has changed dramatically, and that whole scene has shifted. And so what happened back at the beginning of that occupation, if you will, and maybe we're still seeing ramifications of what happened, flowered, and then maybe was partially and maybe completely forced back underground, but it ain't gone. And that, I'm talking about the whole Arab Spring and the movement of the desire for the expression of deep freedoms. You see, it used to be historically that it was easy to keep these things suppressed because people didn't have cell phones and internet, and now people see what's going on the other sides of the world, and so they get glimpses of that, and they want that. And I don't think it's as easy to suppress the energy. The flip side of that is that the people in control also are playing a more serious game. And we will see this game being played out through 2019. I know I talked about this a little bit last month, but February of 2019 is significant, that it's almost like this fear of panic that we got to take care of stuff that we didn't take care of. Now, I know that was a long-winded introduction, but the weird thing is, the most important thing that's happening in February is nothing, except for the fact that Uranus sits at the last degree of Aries until it moves in March into Taurus, and then it's done in Aries. But the interesting thing here is, and we're looking here at a chart for January 30th. I'm going to change charts here, and we're going to go to bear with me here just one second. No, it was right. All right. There we go. All right. So here we have a chart for February 31st. Okay. For February 1st, 2019, and I want to point out a couple of things here of significance. What I want to point out, number one, is that as we just talked about, there's Uranus. Here it's at 28 degrees 53 minutes. But as the month progresses, that will reach very quickly in the first couple of days of the month. It will reach into the 29th degree, where it will spend the whole month before it moves into Taurus in March. The other piece of this puzzle is that Mars moved into Aries on New Year's Eve of this year, of 2019. So far, all of 2019 has been a little bit assertive, aggressive, worry, if you will, of people yelling a lot and fighting. We've certainly seen this at the political level, the Martian angry standoff, at the top, at least in the United States, but we're seeing it also in Brazil and Venezuela, in other parts of the country, other parts of the world for sure. It's in Brexit, in England. We do not have a corner on this energy. So the thing here, though, is that we started off the year with Mars in Aries, and that Mars moves toward a conjunction with Uranus that's exact on February 12th. And this will be a key piece of the month, because Mars will line up with Uranus in Aries for the last time in our lifetimes. So, Mars. All right, so we need to focus on Mars for a minute, because Mars takes about 2 years to go around the sky, around the zodiac, around the sun once, a little bit less than that actually. But Mars is roughly a 2-year rhythm, which means that Mars actually spends about 6 weeks or so in each sign until it turns retrograde, and then it spends 8 months hanging out in one area of the sky, straddled over one or sometimes 2 signs. So Mars is like the bow and arrow, and I know I've said this here from this stage when Mars has been retrograde, because it's like for 8 months we're pulling back on the bow, and then it's released, and then for the next year and a half that arrow is going forward on the energy that was built from the retrograde. Mars, like every planet, has affinity to certain signs of the zodiac and doesn't like certain signs of the zodiac. All planets are like that. And Mars is at home. The technical word for this is Mars's domicile, Mars's home sign is Aries. So we started this year with a functional Mars. It was easy to make our position, to hold our ground, to tell someone what we needed or what we didn't want. This was just part of the fieriness and the feistiness of this month that will continue all the way up through mid-February. But in mid-February, on February 14th, happy Valentine's Day, Mars leaves feisty warrior Aries and settles into teddy bear kind of bovine, not teddy bear. Bears are kind of Taurian, but bovines are really Taurian. and it's Taurus the bull. It really could be Taurus the cow. But the problem is that in our culture, we don't think a lot of cows. We just milk them and put them on Big Macs. Seriously, a cow is not... But remember that in the age of Taurus, when Hinduism arose, the cow was considered to be sacred. In Egypt, prior to the age of Aries, which was the ram, the fiery, feisty warrior god, the Passover with the blood on the door, and the spring lamb, that was the age of Aries. But prior to that, the age of Taurus, the Egyptians were worshiping Venus sensually through the bovine energy, the cow. So you can say Taurus the cow and then give the explanation, because Taurus is the most feminine of all the 12 signs. It's ruled by Venus. Venus is at home. It's Venus's domicile. So Venus is at home in Taurus, and Taurus is a feminine sign. So what's this thing with the horns and the balls and the bolero? But the deal is that it comes at a time of year when the spring energy is still building. So even though Taurus is a yin or feminine energy, there is a building of energy through the first quarter of the year as the sun moves through Aries, Taurus, and Gemini, and then gets to summer and then begins to settle a bit. But here's what happens on Valentine's Day when Mars moves from Aries to Taurus. Mars is not happy about it. Mars can be very functional in Taurus. Why? Because in Aries, Mars can get up and go anywhere, anytime, for any reason. If it sounds like it's good, Mars is, I'm in, let's do it, because Mars is action-oriented. It's impulsive. It's instantaneous. It's Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now. Ram Dass is in Aries. Mars in Aries is be here now. So that's fantastic, unless you want to finish what you started. And there's the Aries downfall. Even Mars at home in Aries is better at starting things than finishing things. In Taurus, however, ain't no stopping that dude or dudette once he or she gets going. Because an object at rest tends to stay at rest, but an object in motion in the world of Taurus stays in motion. And so the good news about the Mars in Taurus is that it becomes bullheaded. It becomes obstinate, stubborn. It becomes fixed in its determination to get to where it's going. And that's going to be interesting because Mars is going to be moving through Taurus, and then next month Uranus will move into Taurus and almost give that a boost of lightning. So we're going to get this whole change of feeling, whether we look out at the world or whether we look into our own individual hearts. It's the same energy, one reflects the other. So the other big event this month that is not about an aspect is the fact that Chiron, which had also tipped into Aries and then retrograded back into Pisces. Chiron is another slow-moving energy planet. It's not a planet, it's not an asteroid, it's actually a centaur. There's about 8 or 10 known objects that are now referred to as centaurs, and Chiron and Nemesis and Chericlo and a bunch of them. But Chiron is the wounded healer. Chiron was half the centaur, half horse, half man. And someone once pointed out to me a very interesting fact that a lot of people don't realize, and that is centaurs have extra chakras. Think about it. Because they are basically man from the navel up, and yet they're horse up to the upper chest. And so there's one morphs into the other. Anyhow, Chiron as the wounded healer represents that part of us that that no amount of sex, drugs, rock and roll, yoga, therapy, or anything else will ever make go away. It's the part of us that when we were 12 or 17, was maybe problematic, and at 78 is probably still problematic, just not that big of a deal because you've learned to live with it for the last 50 or 70 years. So Chiron is the wound that makes us human. It's the part of each and every one of us that's not fully integrated. And what happens because of Freud 101 projection is what we do is we move through life and we see people who may be hurting in the same way that we are or may be heading that way. And so what we do is we help them. We fix it in them. It doesn't fix it in us, but it salves our wound. And this is the concept of the Fisher King, which that story is very closely related to Chiron. And the Fisher King, of course, wasn't trout fishing for dinner. The Fisher King was fishing for souls like Christ. There was the whole multiplicity of the fish. So, age of Pisces, Pisces, Latin fish. So, Chiron moves back into Aries on February 18th, mid-month also, and stays in Aries until, I think, 2006, 2007, it touches into Taurus, back into Aries, and then back into Taurus. So, in the last few years, the last 6 years or so, with Chiron in Pisces, there was this sense of kind of trying to deal with our sense of compassion. There was a re-emphasis on mind, body, spirit medicine, on spirit medicines in general. That whole idea of reconnecting with the Piscean part of us that's not just about, as Deepak Chopra calls it, the superstition of materialism. It goes into the other realms. As Chiron moves into Aries, we can expect over the next 4, 5, 6 years to see major advancements in the technology of medicine, but maybe not in the way that we have seen over the last years. There may be totally new avenues that open up, and some of them may be quite inspiring and activating, that just come completely from left field, if you will. But there's another sense of Chiron moving into Aries, and that is the sense of urgency. Because Aries is here and now, and I find it very interesting that Chiron moves into Aries just as Uranus is moving out. And so it's almost like a cosmic baton being passed, and we will follow that Chiron as it moves, through Aries in the months ahead. So let's come back to the chart for now, and let's actually a couple of things at the very beginning of the month. One of the key players this month also is going to be Venus. Venus right now is at the very last degrees of Sagittarius, and as such, she is going to harmonize with Uranus and make an exact trine on February 2nd, beginning of the month. Venus and Uranus are harmonizing. Remember, Uranus is unpredictable, it's new, it's shocking, it's out of the box. Venus is love, it's what you like, it's money. We can expect something that's a surprise, perhaps, in the financial sector, just in the stock market and commodities and in cryptocurrency, whatever. Something there might happen over those first few days of February. Secondly, on a personal level, we're more open to being surprised by love, and I don't necessarily mean romantic love only. I mean any sort of nice beauty, art, a book, a movie, things that will come in can open us up, and when Venus is harmonized with Uranus, we don't have the same resistance to being outside of the box that we might otherwise have. So just keep that in mind. This is the beginning of February. It's not all that easy though, because Mars, who's another key player on the beginning, where's Mars? We talked about how Mars is moving toward conjuncting Uranus, right? By February 12th, I said, right. All right, the other thing, though, is we talked also about how Uranus moves faster than Pluto, and Uranus and Pluto, there's Pluto back at 21 degrees of Capricorn. Uranus was square to Pluto, but Uranus is now moving fast, always moving faster than Pluto, so Uranus is escaping from that square. There's about 8 degrees now between the two, between that square, 21 degrees to 28 degrees, 7 degrees. But the thing here is that Mars is actually squaring Pluto as February opens. And by the middle of the month, Mars will conjunct Uranus. Now, there's a branch of astrology called horary astrology, which is the astrology of answering questions in the moment, which we're not going to delve into here. But one of the concepts in horary astrology is something called the translation of light. And it's when a fast-moving planet makes an aspect with one planet and then another, as if the energy is shifted from one to the other. And it's my contention that in slow motion, we open the month with Mars squaring Pluto. This is a nasty combo. If you see them standing on a street corner, walk around it. You know, unless you got a good knife in your pocket, and and your boys are behind you ready to rumble, then maybe it's okay. But Mars and Pluto are tough customers. Mars is the god of war. Pluto is the lord of the hell realms. Do the math. In ancient astrology, Saturn and Mars were the bad guys. They were the malefics. But they didn't know about Pluto. I call Pluto Darth Pluto. So Mars squaring Pluto is about power struggle. And again, this has been cooking for weeks because Mars, even at the beginning of the year when it moved into Aries, Aries by sign is square to Capricorn by sign. So even though it's not Mars is already working differently than Capricorn. Capricorn is planting its feet on the ground and doing the calculations, figuring out where it wants to go, and says, I'll do anything I need to do to get to where I'm going. Different than the Taurus determination, who's already moving. The Capricorn is going to make the plan and then execute the plan. Mars, on the other hand, is, comes in, with blazing, swords and knives and whatever. Remember that scene in, it was in the first Indiana Jones movie, where he's getting ready to leave from somewhere, and there's a plane going, and the propellers are spinning on the plane, and there's this big guy with, I think there were knives, and he was, spinning these knives with these kind of black belt ninja moves, and he was standing between Indiana Jones and the airplane, and the camera's on Indiana Jones first looking horrified, and then seeing this guy doing his thing like this, and Indiana Jones kind of goes like this, pulls out his gun, shoots him, and walks on the plane. That's Mars. Guns blazing. There's that sense of the work, and again, this whole government shutdown, this unprecedented government shutdown, in a way, was a pissing match between Mars, and actually it's more complicated than that because it began with Mars square. If we ran this back, it began with Mars squaring Saturn. Mars squaring Saturn. Mars is yes, Saturn's no. Mars is the gas pedal, Saturn is the brake, and we saw this kind of total frustration of not being able to, to go forward or go backward. But it's translated now into that Mars now moving on to square Pluto, which is exact on February 2nd. It's by degree close here already on the 1st. But then, so we're getting this kind of slow motion translation of light, if you will, from the power struggle of who's holding the power, Mars squaring Pluto dynamic. And again, politically, our country, Venezuela, England, but also in individual lives, relationships, etc. But this all breaks through by the middle of the month when Mars moves from the square to Pluto to the conjunction to Uranus, and then it moves on into Taurus and plants its feet in the ground. And interestingly enough, once Mars is in Taurus over the next month or so, Mars in Taurus will actually make harmonious trines to Saturn and Pluto, and we may see an energy that is more functional in organizing the quote-unquote opposite energies up there, out there, in here, wherever. All right, so we're not very far into the month. We need to move along. For a month, nothing's happening. Jesus. Okay. What I want to do is I want to jump to the 4th, and I want you to keep your eye here on the moon and the sun. Remember, the backdrop of this whole month, or up until around the 20th of February, 19th of February anyhow, is that the sun is in Aquarius, and Aquarius is arguably the weirdest sign in the zodiac. I mean, it's so weird that it is the water bearer, but it's not a water sign. It's an air sign. And I know I've said this here before, but it's an air sign because air conducts electricity better when it's moist. And if you don't believe me, go to Fargo, North Dakota, where it's 28 degrees below zero right now, and say hello to anyone, but you won't want to touch them and shake their hand, because if you do, you'll get a spark that will probably hurt. Because when it's so cold and dry, there's no grounding, there's no transmission of electricity, so that when you touch a light socket or touch someone else, you actually get a spark, which in Florida you would never get because the air is warm and wet. And so Aquarius is the moisture in the air that allows us to transmit nervous energy, high frequency. It's not the feelings, it's the transmission of the feelings through the invisible medium, through the air. And Aquarius is, it's a weird sign. I mean, Jeff used to say that Aquarians love humanity, it's just the humans they hate. You know? Aquarians like dry love. Don't even go there. But there's the sense of not wanting to be engaged in the emotional mucky muck, because Aquarius likes that. It's the Norwegian or the Scandinavian cool detachment that allows for space and still interaction and communication, but it's the shaman who will not live in town, who lives on the edge of town. It's Groucho Marx who said, I would never be stupid enough to, I would never join a club that would be stupid enough to invite me as a member. You know, it's that I'm a member of this social group, but they're all idiots. That's the Aquarius energy. So the sun is in Aquarius, so that yesterday Mercury lined up with the sun, which is a high frequency communication, and now Mercury is pushing ahead of the sun. But watch what happens now, I say now over the first few days of February, as the moon moves closer and closer to the sun, which it actually, well, we can't do this by a minute, do this by an hour, there we go. So there it is, close enough, we can get closer. So there it is roughly at, on February 4th, the exact time is, 1:03, look, it works. 1:03 p.m. in Seattle, West Coast Pacific time. The sun and the moon are at the exact same place in the sky. This is a new moon. The last new moon was a solar eclipse. This new moon, as all new moons, is a beginning. And this new moon is an interesting beginning. You know, this is also the Chinese New Year, because the first new moon after the beginning of the year, after the sun goes out of Capricorn, which is where it is in the beginning of the year, that's the Chinese New Year. And in Aquarius, there's that sense of it being as cold as it gets, it's deep winter, but there's also inklings. I don't know if anyone noticed, but last night, probably tonight too, at 5 o'clock here in Seattle, it wasn't dark. It's changed, because a month ago it was. 5:30 is still kind of twilighty. The energy actually, the days change the fastest in the middle of the seasons. And so right now the days are gaining light faster than they do at any other time of year, which is part of what makes Aquarius so weird, is because we're looking ahead to spring, because it feels like there's inklings of spring when we can see the sun coming back, and yet it's cold and winter and not spring. So this new moon in Aquarius is very powerful, and part of its power is derived from the fact that it is harmonized or cooperatively sextile to Jupiter. We have this entire year, most of the year, 2019, Jupiter is in its home sign. And I might have said this last month, but it's been a very unusual period of time with Jupiter in its home sign, Sagittarius, Mars in its home sign, Aries, Saturn in its home sign, Capricorn, and Neptune in its home sign, Pisces. And so the planets are kind of really, they're like on steroids. They're really pumping their own energy right now. And it's very powerful. So this new moon, in some ways, is like, it's wiping the slate clean a bit, because we have some changes that are ready to come up, including the Mars and Uranus in the next lunation cycle moving into Taurus, including Venus, which was just a few days ago. Let's just back this up again. Come on. There we go. Venus, which moved on the 2nd from Sagittarius into Capricorn. We'll say more about that in a moment. But all these planets, Venus, Saturn, and Pluto in Capricorn, and the new moon in Aquarius. Remember, in traditional astrology, Aquarius, like Capricorn, was connected to Saturn. So there is this base of energy now that really has to do with seeing the future, Aquarius, but making things real. So let's race through the rest of the month, seeing as how we're all the way on the 4th. Well, the thing is that a lot of what I've done is set up the month. And setting up the month and the overall energy is important, because sometimes it's easy to get distracted by these little in particular aspects. And although they make sense if you drill down to that level astrologically, they always occur in a context. And losing the context is more dangerous than losing the noise of the day. And I sometimes have referred to the daily aspects that the planets make, as I sometimes call them, give us this day our daily noise. All right. So the new moon in Aquarius really sets that tone. We do have something else, though, that this new moon is imprinting. The aspect actually occurred on the last day of January, but it's still impacting right now, and that's the sextile between Saturn and Neptune. And you can go back and listen to the last part of last month's, which is still up on YouTube. But Saturn is the planet that makes things real. Neptune is the planet of dreams and illusions. And here we have a chance at the beginning of this month to actually take some of our dreams, some of our illusions, and precipitate them into the real world. And that's part of this new moon. But the new moon itself, that it's sextile to Jupiter, and it's both coming into, in other words, the moon makes the sextile to Jupiter about 5-6 hours after the new moon, and the sun sextiles Jupiter just a couple of days later. The sun sextiles Jupiter on February 7th, and so this new moon kind of puts our attention ahead, and it puts out the carrot on the stick. Except the carrot isn't just a carrot. It's not even just a sweet, fresh-picked, organic carrot. It's Jupiter. It's like the biggest carrot in the solar system. And so it feels like the resolutions that we make at this coming new moon on February 4th, it feels like they will solve all of our problems. The good news is that they can solve a lot, and it's really good stuff to focus on. The bad news is disillusionment. Because whenever we have the illusion, the creation of a dream, as it becomes real, it often then becomes disillusioned. I think I talked about this last month too, because it's part of the dance between the Saturn and Neptune, is the making things real and then having to deal with the fact that they were better when they were dreams. And the solution to that is the realization, tough. They're still better. They may have been better as dreams than reality, but in reality, they're better in reality than them not being in reality. That's the true meaning of disillusionment. It's illusions being made real. All right. So as we move along in the month, we have the 7th after the new moon. We have the Sun sextiling Jupiter. We have Mercury sextiling Mars. We have Mercury sextiling actually Mars and Uranus that are coming closer and closer together. And so this whole little sextile pattern here, you'll see it right there. First Mercury, and then the Sun will come in and do the same thing. That's a sweet energy. That gives us an ability to work with the existent energy. So we have some real stuff this month that allows us to work with what we've been given. On the 9th, Mercury reaches the last degree of Aquarius, and it makes a sextile with Uranus. And again, every time one of these inner planets hits Uranus at the end of the sign, it's like one more, oh shit, I better get this done before Uranus moves out of Aries. There's another round of kind of things happening, things coming out into the open, loose ends being tied up, if you will. Or if it's Uranus really working as Uranus done, it's tight ends being untied. Because that's when we have to then do the work. But then Mercury moves into Pisces on the 10th. And that can soften the energies a little bit. In fact, we now have Venus in Capricorn and Mercury in Pisces. And I think both Venus in Capricorn is more subtle, more sustained, more restrained than she was in Sagittarius. And Mercury in Pisces is more dreamy and more poetic and maybe softer than it was when it was, just riding the, neurological circuits in some sci-fi thriller, back when he was, when it was in Aquarius. So the energy is definitely softening a bit, and yet at the same time, we have Mars inching closer and closer to that conjunction with Uranus that is exact on the 12th. And so on one hand, we're feeling like the energy is soothing and softening, and on the other hand, it's like our antennae are up. It's like we're becoming agitated, and it's like something's got to give, something's got to change. We want to move into some new territory. We want to take care of something that we didn't do now before Uranus moves into Taurus and Mars moves into Taurus. It's almost like when Uranus and Mars are in Aries. You know when you make bronze is made from a mixture of copper and tin? Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Tin is quite malleable, soft. Copper also is very bendable and soft. If you mix copper and tin and heat it up, when it cools, it becomes bronze. And it's a different animal. It's stronger than dirt. It holds its shape. And you can't just bend it and work with it, and you can't melt it back down into the copper and tin again. It's an alloy. And it's almost like Mars and Uranus, as they approach this conjunction, it's almost like reality becomes a bit of a sudden molten whatever. And by the time Uranus and Mars each move into Taurus over the days ahead, it's like whatever you got, done. I shoulda, yeah, you shoulda. I shouldn't have, well, maybe you shouldn't have. And I'm not saying it's all regret. It's just that whatever we do becomes solidified, whatever we don't do becomes solidified. You with me? All right, so that takes us up toward the middle of the month as we push on past Valentine's Day. And Valentine's Day is interesting this year. It's the moon is opposed, the moon in Gemini is opposed to Jupiter. There's a bit of overdoing, overindulgence. That moon picks up on not only opposition to Jupiter, but the square to Neptune. So there may be some dreamy romancing that's, overstated or, but behind that, we have this lovely Venus coming into first a sextile to Neptune, and that's exact on the 17th, I think I said. Venus sextile Neptune on the 17th, and then Venus conjuncts Saturn on the 18th. So this little dance here that Venus does, so right here on the 16th, 17th, and 18th, we see Venus going from 14 degrees to 16 degrees, sextiling Neptune, Venus sextile Neptune. Keyword for Venus?
Love, value,
Beauty.
Oh, good. Keyword for Neptune?
dreams,
Dreaming.
illusion.
Yeah, all good. And a sextile is basically cooperation between the two. What do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. This is like a bit of perhaps romance or dreaming or creating bubbles of ideal whatever. But by the following day, by the late 17th, Venus runs into a conjunction with Saturn. Keyword for Saturn. Yeah. Saturn, Neptune is saying, wow, sing a song. All you need is love. And then all of a sudden Venus runs into Saturn, and Saturn says, not a chance. I don't think so. No. The break.
Yep.
Now, this is not just good news, bad news, good news, dreams, fantasies, illusion, bad news, reality. What it really is a chance to use your imagination in a way, again, to have the power of being the disillusioner, meaning you get to make something real. Venus and Saturn theoretically don't work well together because Venus is warm and Saturn is cold. Venus is yummy and Saturn is hard edges, Venus is pleasurable and Saturn is functional. They're just different games. But when the two of them can get it together and can work, you have a friendship that survives anything. You have a loveship that has loyalty and commitment that is incredibly powerful. Venus and Saturn together can be amazingly powerful. But it's a different energy than the fantasy. And it's interesting because over the days ahead, Mercury is moving closer and closer to Neptune, and so we're not done with the fantasy. And so there's a little dance this year in mid-February around Valentine's Day and the days after of doing this dance between, what's real and what's a dream, and how am I going to make my dreams come true, and if they do come true that way, do I really want them? All of that is part of this little dance that I think will occupy much of the middle of the month. And then by the 18th, 19th, Chiron moves into Aries. We talked about that a little bit already. And then right behind it, the Sun, here at the last degree of Aquarius, now moves into Pisces. And the energy shift for the month is kind of completed. We still have other stuff to go on, but now we have Mars in Taurus, the Sun, in Pisces, And Venus in Capricorn is a very different flavor than the fiery, feisty, let's stand up for our rights, let's do what we need to do that began January. Now we're kind of a bit more intuitive, a bit more compassionate, a bit more willing to go with the proverbial flow, if you will. And the sun, as it changes signs from the last degree of Aquarius, it will make a sextile with Uranus. So again, we got some major change stuff going on here that is not change that will probably stand by itself, but it's change that's part of the larger picture of the whole Uranus-Pluto thing from 2010 all the way up through now, 2012 through 2015. And so I imagine that we'll see some pretty significant things, you know, going down at that period of time. Of course, the government may be shut down another week already by then. Or, you know, I don't know, and I'm done putting my guesses on what are going to happen in the future, because when it comes to guessing about what's next week in the political scheme of things, I'm just as bad as you are. But this Sun sextile Uranus is potent, and it's potent for change. And again, we have this kind of translation energy, because over the next couple days, the Sun moves into Pisces, and as soon as it moves into Pisces, it immediately picks up on the sign sextile from Pisces to Taurus, which is picking up on that energetic umph, and it's feeding it's feeding energy, feeding radiance. The Sun is feeding energy into Mars in Taurus. And so if you want to have a few days that you want to get things done, whether it's a home project or something that you've been putting off, I mean, you know, it's midweek, and it's always a shame to waste these good transits on work. No, I'm kidding. What I mean is on your job. But the fact of the matter is that the 19th, 20th, 21st, 22nd, 23rd, it's the Sun and Mars are moving very close to the same speed, so you can see that they're still holding their position, and it's not until that Sun doesn't reach the sextile to Mars until February 27th is when it's exact. So the whole second half of the month has this energetic movement to it that is not easy. It's not a trine. Trines flow. It's a sextile. You got to work at it, but if you work at it, the energies, you can cooperate, you can co-operate the Sun while operating Mars. That sounded wrong, but it was exactly correct, which also sounded wrong. Okay, so let's back up here a little bit, and we have a full moon to hit, and we already talked about the Sun moving into Pisces. All right, let's back up to the 19th. So this is a really interesting full moon to me. It's really interesting because the moon has been in Leo from like the 17th, 18th, and on the 19th in the morning, the moon moves from Leo into Virgo. And only an hour and a half after it moves into Virgo, it's exactly full. Because the Sun has just moved into Pisces. So the Sun has just moved into Pisces the day before. The moon moves into Virgo, boom, full moon. And this full moon is harmonized or trine to Mars, having just moved into Taurus. But it's really also, by degrees, it's even closer to the Uranus, which is still at the very, very end of Aries, because Uranus doesn't move into Taurus until March. But 29.5 to 0 3/4. I mean, that's less than that's just a little bit over a degree, but its connection to Mars is more like almost, it's like 2 3/4 degrees, 2 1/4 degrees. So this whole connection here, this full moon to the Mars-Uranus straddling between Aries and Taurus, I think is the last statement of the whole Uranus-Pluto square. And again, we'll have ramifications for years to come, just like through most of the 70s and even into the 80s and maybe even longer, we had fallout from what occurred in the 60s. And so the 2012 to 2010 to 2017, historically will have that same kind of impact that the 60s did, with a different label. It's a different time, a different era. But it was an amazing time to live through and go through, because reality was in just as big a turmoil. You know, it was not the way it was supposed to be if we just read the books, and you couldn't continue anything on a straight line from 2000 and end up here in 2019. It just doesn't work. Just like you couldn't take the 50s and extend them into the 70s. Doesn't work. Something happened. And by the same token, that's going on now, but we're at the tail end of this major event, and this full moon, I think, brings focus to it. But there is an important extenuating circumstance, and it's up here in Capricorn, and it has to do with Saturn and Pluto. Now remember, Pluto is a 44 years to go around once. Meanwhile, Saturn goes around every 29 and a half years. So about every 35 years, give or take a few years, Saturn will catch up with Pluto. But each time Pluto will be down another sign or so, because 30 years later Pluto's moved along. When Saturn and Pluto align, or when they're opposite, there's historical events that correspond. And I'm not going to go deeply into it now. It's something that over the next year I'll be talking about every month, because as I've said, I probably said last month, the most important event in 2019 occurs on January 11th, 2020. And on January 11th, 2020, Saturn will catch up with Pluto. And that alignment is the alignment that major events happen within a year. So we're already in that telescopic range, whatever you call that. What do you call it? In the picture, in the window. And I'll just give you a quick smattering of some of the events that have happened under Saturn-Pluto conjunctions or oppositions. Muhammad walked into Mecca and declared it the state of Islam. 300, 400 years later, the Moors invaded Spain on the year of a Saturn-Pluto event, conjunction or opposition. 700 years later, the Spaniards kicked the Arabs out of Spain back into northern Africa, and it became Catholic Spain as we know it today on the year of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Oh, little things like the Battle of Hastings, like, how about World War I? Within a month of the shots that were fired in the Balkans, Duke Ferdinand, that was a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Incidentally, World War II was on a Saturn-Pluto square, so it doesn't fall right into this window, but you might open up a side window to let it in. But there were also other things like Great Britain abolished slavery throughout the entire United Kingdom the year that Saturn and Pluto were aligned in 1830-something. And then 30 years later, at the next alignment, we had the Emancipation Proclamation. So it's not all bad stuff, but it's always old stuff rubbing up against new stuff. The most recently was in September of 2001, Saturn and Pluto were opposed, and we had what we refer to as September 11th. It's horrific to demean a day of the year because something happened on that day. But whatever. I mean, I have friends who are born on September 11th. They want to change their birthday officially. But the point here is that Saturn and Pluto don't ever surprise us. Well, they can surprise us, but it's always something that's on a continuum. It's always, you can follow that in 1898, Gandhi spent the year in jail in South Africa, helping the Indians, the Indian Indians get their freedoms in South Africa. At the next conjunction, he was doing activist work in India, and then it got swept up into World War I. At the next one in 1931, he spent the year in jail again. That was the Salt March. And then at the next conjunction, that was in 1947, incidentally within a year of either side, we had the UN founded, we had Palestine disappeared and became Israel. I mean, there were major things around that one in 1947, 46, 47, 48. But within a week of the exact conjunction was when India and Pakistan were given freedom. And I learned in school what wonderful time that was, because the whole thing was done without a war, without anyone fighting, only to discover as an adult that 500,000 people were killed in the following year in battle skirmishes between the Hindus and the Muslims as to who controlled Kashmir. Little things they forget to tell us. But the point is that that little scenario is all related to Gandhi, and here's the crazy thing. Saturn and Pluto aligned in 1982, and that was the year the Gandhi movie came out. How can you possibly make this shit up? All right, so, but the point is, bringing this back around to this month, the reason why I've introduced this, and you'll probably get tired of some of those stories because they'll keep coming up in different topics through the year, because Saturn doesn't reach Pluto until a year from now. But all year we're going to be feeling that need for evolution, transformation, change, that's Pluto metamorphosis, being pushed up against by the structures, by the stability, by the states, by the laws, by the traditions. And so we have that going, and I think that this full moon, in a way, is kind of, again, a break from that, because even though Uranus is going to be freed from its square to Pluto, which has been impacting us for this whole decade, even though that's true, Saturn is still there pushing in against it, and so it's like we're still waiting for the other shoe to fall, and it will. But I think this full moon becomes an important part of that. After the full moon, I think the big events are on the 22nd. On the 22nd, we have Mercury squaring Jupiter. Mercury here squaring Jupiter. This is just a period of time when our optimism can run away with itself. In fact, that's a key word for the whole month. I mean, all month we're working with this Jupiter squaring Neptune in the background. It's not exact. It was exact in January. But as planets move into conjunct or square either Neptune or Jupiter, they'll square or conjunct the other one. And so here we have Mercury doing that. And I think that this is just a time where we can just see things in a brighter light than they really are. Our hope and our optimism is a good thing, but we can be blinded by it and not necessarily see some of the things that are right in front of us. By the 22nd, we now have Venus inching up also toward Pluto. And remember, Venus, like all the other faster moving planets, first it'll conjunct Pluto, and then it's going to square Uranus. But that Venus doesn't square Uranus until next month, when Uranus is already into Taurus. But the Venus conjuncting Pluto around February 23rd, again, we can look for deep stuff coming out into the open. We can look for feelings being expressed, whether it's politically or whether it's in individual relationships. When Venus is conjoining Pluto, we don't want to deal with any surface crap. We want to go for the jugular vein. We want to go to you know, what's at the bottom, and we want to engage that, or whether we want to or not, we do, and we can, and it can be very transformative, because that's where the real meaning is. And when Venus is conjuncting Pluto toward the end of February, we're just not interested in going to a party and talking about, you know, the weather and the sports. We want to talk about things that matter, because we want to feel things that matter. And that's with us around the 22nd, 23rd. As we push toward the end of the month, the energy kind of soothes out a little bit. We have Mercury forming a sextile with Pluto on the 23rd, the Sun forming a sextile with Mars on the 27th. We already talked about that one. The energy things are easier to express as we get to the end of the month, but it's also almost like we realize that there are big enough things changing that we can't change everything all at once, and we know we can't. And so it's almost like we're willing to stretch and to see what this feels like before taking whatever the next steps are or the next action is. And so I think as we look at this month as a whole, it's a month that's an in-between month, but there are very important things. There are things that will grab us, that will catch our attention for days, week at a time, but they're not the same level of things. It's like whatever happens this month, I think will have precedence back in January or December past, or in 2018, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13. And so it's like this month is a month of transition and a month of finality and a month of almost ready to begin, but we can't begin the new until we finish up the old.